Everyone. This is just going to be an after debate stream. I thought I would best pop on and answer a couple of questions. Hopefully, do my best to essentially let people know. Oh God, let people know or ask questions about my beliefs in this. I don't really feel like I got pushed very much on terms of ethics and justice as much as socially condemned. Like, oh, well, what good's this going to do? Whilst he presupposes a notion of good. So, the same, I guess the same good that he presupposes. But I think, moreover, I know that it's obviously a negative aesthetic to be seen as, oh, this guy wants retribution. This guy wants to make people suffer. I don't want to make people suffer. I actually think that it's sad that this has to happen. It's just sad that criminals do this. But yeah, we're going to try and, let's say, let people know that it is even going on. And I am sorry for all the technical difficulties, man. Like, if I could just go one day without having a technical difficulty, that would be great. Okay. Let's go to Twitter. I'm sure they'll love us. Let's see. Hey there, Vishant. You are first. You are first indeed. Okay. All right. Metal. Absolutely, man. Absolutely. Hi, PP. Hi, man. All good. How you all doing? I thought I'd just come on here, answer a couple of questions in relation to the debate. Obviously, I had to... I couldn't actually get this camera and everything working to go back into the debate with, so that was kind of frustrating, if I'm honest. But, I can live with it. What am I doing today? Well, I actually just had a debate on life without parole and why I think it's actually a justified form of punishment. So yeah. And okay, Jesus Christ, just moving myself up like that, yeah. Well, no doubt. I do think that he was a bit of a rhetorician. The fact that he was like, well, it doesn't do any good, and then every time when I asked him to define what is good, he didn't have an answer. It's like utilitarianism. Murder infinite. Why is murder infinite? Okay, so the reason I would say that murder is infinite is essentially because when we judge the quantity of damage, it's against the subjectivity lost, like the freedom, the ability to obtain the moral goal or produce some sort of moral, some sort of event or good within the world. That has been taken from an individual when a crime has been committed. Their autonomy, their subjectivity has been trespassed upon. Their judgments have been discarded to a varying degree. How much it's been discarded and how much of their interests have been violated depends upon the crime. I would say that the violation of their interests and their subjectivity is absolute in terms of murder. The individual cannot be considered at all in this. Their interests cannot be considered at all. So, in which case, I would say that the debt is qualitatively different to other crimes, in that it essentially cannot be restored through a form of restitution. Did I enjoy the debate? Somewhat. I mean, I know it's always going to be spun, and the fact that I'm calling out liberalism, and obviously the Anglosphere liberalism is really popular. Like the sort of English-speaking world, liberal ideology is like the most common. So I know that I'm probably going to be unpopular, but I don't think that. Like, I mean, if I could have got, I mean, he doesn't want to go into meta ethics and he doesn't want to go into theories of justice, but he ended a debate on the philosophy of law. So I just find that a bit strange. Otherwise, I would have just like, yeah, like let's talk about justice. But he wants to talk about money. He wants to talk about how much it costs to incarcerate someone, rather than necessarily why we are incarcerating them in the first place. Are vegans guilty of multiple murders? No, not at all. How would that be different to losing your virginity? Well, I would say that virginity is just a social construct while we're talking about the death of a concrete individual. Like there is not actually a, like, virginity is like not really a thing. The concrete individual is an ideal reality. They're a subject that exists. That would be the difference, nuclear. I think comparing murder to losing your virginity is a little bit weird. Can I punish myself for all the crimes against animals? I don't think vegans, when going vegan is the realization that you are doing wrong to animals, and so you seek to not do that. I wouldn't say that that if you are totally ignorant and not willfully ignorant, but or negligent, but you do not realize the harm you are doing, you could not have realized the harm you are doing, then I wouldn't say that you are guilty of a crime there. And also, I would say that obviously without being a law in the state means it's not actually a solidified notion of justice from which everyone can be expected to know and abide with. Well, yeah, it's your first time experiencing a thing, but experiencing a thing is experiencing an objective, an object of existence, and not necessarily what a subject is, which is what objectifies the world. That's the qualitative difference. One is the annihilation of an object within the world and the manipulation of it towards the aims of a given individual, whilst one is the annihilation of a subject, an individual who objectifies the world. Hegel did not grant animal rights. No. But he basically argued that animals were not, because they're not rational agents, weren't able to take ownership of themselves. I think he's wrong in that. He basically says as well, kind of contradictorily, that animals own themselves basically until we do. Yeah, it is really frustrating to see him presupposing a meta-ethic, but refusing to discuss meta-ethics. I think basically saying, I'm not going to debate a theory of justice, I'm just going to presuppose one. I would just consider that a debate loss, to be entirely honest with you. I don't even necessarily think that any of these concrete applications even matter if he's not willing to defend his assertion of what justice is. He's like, this is what good is, and if you disagree with me, then you're wrong. Well, I think that's absolutely disgusting. Why is the ending of a life infinite? Because it's the totality of an individual's experience. Because any other form of experience is a finite amount of subjectivity. It's a finite amount of experience. Whilst murder is the totality of their experience. If you take someone's eyes, that's not infinite punishment. Again, that's just taking an object within the world. Their subjectivity remains. They're still capable of objectifying the world, just not through their eyes. Is murder of animals trespassing my property, which can't be removed without lethal force, moral? Why do humans have the right to private property? Well, I would say that it depends on why you're essentially killing them. I mean, can they be, if they can't be removed from other means and they are causing a disruption and an inability to live a decent quality of life and a fair quality of life, then it's not, you aren't disregarding the value of the animal. You're essentially committing an act of double effect. You are essentially trying to protect yourself and you're being attacked by an animal. It's an act of self-defense. Same as if another individual just starts sleeping on your property, using all your, let's say, water and electric and stuff like that, and there's no way for you to remove them otherwise, then I don't see an issue there either. That's an act of self-defense. why would the totality of a thing be equal to the infinity? Because it encompasses the absolute, like the absolute completion of the thing. It's not like I think people expect infinity to be, let's say, an abstract 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1, when it's actually something which is a transcendental condition for anything else. So if you look at like space and time, it's not that space and time necessarily have to be, take space. It's not that there has to be infinite objects within reality, right? And so infinite space, right? This is like a Kantian notion of space, so I will say that. But for an object to exist, space needs to be presupposed. So space hypothetically is infinite. It's not that it is concretely infinite in the sense that it goes on forever, and it, you try, no matter how far you can just keep traversing, and it's like there is an infinite distance in the universe or something like that. It's more of the fact that regardless of what is observable within reality, space is presupposed in terms of external reality, and so is infinite. In terms of subjectivity, it's the same. Reality requires the subject's participation within the world, and so it amounts to the totality of their existence. It is a necessary condition for anything else to exist for that individual. So it's infinite. Hey man, how you doing? Is philosophy only good for ethics nowadays? No. I mean, you've got like metaphysics, which I think is really useful, and you've got philosophy of science, man. Like, if you're interested in understanding, let's say, the philosophy of science, if you're understanding like different theories of space and time, and how we evaluate various theories of space, time, energy, and various physical concepts, then yeah, I think that philosophy of science is really useful. Often come to conclusions about scientific theories that scientists miss, because they miss the presuppositions a lot more than philosophers do. Yeah, I'd probably make a video about libertarian socialism. I was actually going to make a video on justice before the debate, which I think would probably be a good idea. When talking about your Foucauldian take on class-interested change of inmates' behaviour, were you saying that as purely a descriptive fact, or are you implying this is ethically bad? I think it's ethically bad. I mean, it's descriptive. It's a descriptive fact and ethically bad. Like, I think that the fact that we are trying to manipulate people's behavior eliminates their moral agency. We are using that. We are essentially seeing them as a way to express our moral good through them, and that's what I'm trying to argue with this idea of this perverse liberal mentality. You are seeing people as a means to an end. A class of individuals who controls the justice system then tries to express some notion of value with the bodies of other individuals, with the minds of other individuals. It lends itself to some sort of Clockwork Orange psychotropic manipulation more than it does justice. Do you think there's a gap between knowing it's bad that animals are harmed by buying food and understanding that you are obligated to go vegan? I would say that the biggest barrier is thinking of food and animal as separate objects you can have different attitudes towards, and vegans understand that they are the same object. Yeah, I mean, perhaps. I think it's like dependent on how you understand the world around you ethically. Like, you can understand something. I think that there is a metaphysical reality that if you understand that what an animal is in terms of its value, understand what a burger is, or an animal product in terms of how it's produced, and you understand that this individual has had to have been slaughtered for the production of this product, then it's undeniable in terms of the realization that this is a harm being produced for your interests, that you are using someone as a means to an end rather than an end to themselves. And then that would be why I would say they're probably one and the same in that. If someone has the wealth and means to have crop death-free lifestyle, do they have a moral obligation to live a life of only sustenance? You mean if someone could essentially, like, how would you mean, like, I don't know, like essentially live like off their own land and stuff like that? Well, yeah, that's really great. I mean, I have no problems with that. Like, yeah, they should probably do that. I mean, like you could argue that if they invested their money into to this being essentially tackled as a problem overall, then it would mitigate the harms of farming in general. But I think us as a society should be moving towards a crop deathless scenario if possible. My follow-up question is, if it's ethically bad, isn't living in a society ethically bad because a society inherently have to have some sort of shared value system to work together? No, I would say that the value system that we actually have in relation to us is what creates notions of right. Of course, there'll be badness, as in like in terms of the actually being individuals who are willing necessarily negative actions from which we've then got to defend ourselves against. You know, like for example, it's sad that we've got to have law enforcement and all that. I mean, it'd be really nice if we lived in a utopia. Then yeah, there is an aspect of negativity there. But ultimately, I'd see ethics as the precondition for the subject's expression of their moral engagement with reality in the first place. The individual subject can only understand themselves from a case of mutual recognition as a moral agent. They gain essentially an objective view of themselves, and that's why I would say that an individual's engagement with, let's say, others in terms of not killing them is essential, and it's wholeheartedly rational. Like if you do end up killing other individuals because you reject their value, I'd say you're behaving ironically. You're trying to express a subjective value whilst actually eliminating the possibility of its rightful expression. I grow a lot of plants and I've never had to kill anything. I'm sure it's different on an industrial scale, though. I mean, yeah, and I mean, notions of profit and stuff come in as well, and monocropping and all this sort of stuff. It depends, obviously. There's a lot that goes into how we farm that is avoidable and unavoidable. Do you think that, excuse me, that prisoners should be allowed into virtual realities without confinement in those realities? No. No. It's not about keeping them away from everyone else. I mean, essentially, I would be much more likely to endorse capital punishment as the go-to. But I'm essentially just giving people the choice of death by incarceration or death by, lethal injection or whatever. So like I think that would be, and that'll be justified. It's not that I'm offering life without parole in the sense of like of me seeing it as like, oh yeah, like this is just a way to mitigate all of the harms of people committing crimes. It's just a way of essentially eliminating the subjectivity of that individual, absolutely eliminating their freedom, whilst giving them the opportunity for an elongated appeals process. So yeah. Like the thing is, you talking about the propagation of virtue. I'd say the propagation of virtue requires what's the word? An absolutely equal scenario, and an individual who deems others to be worth less, worthless, worth nowhere near as much as the value of their preferences over them, and so commits and makes that a concrete judgment within reality that this person was worth less than me. I see that as absolutely vile. I don't think that the individual can be virtuous unless they have a metaphysical death. They essentially have to realize that the person they were was so deplorable that they are no longer that person. It has to be essentially a revelation. They have to realize that this was unbelievably wrong, and a call of conscience calls them to be a different human being altogether, that they are basically reborn. And at that point, they can be forgiven. But until that point, they can absolutely not be forgiven. Welcome back. Thanks, man. but we don't create the value system. I think we have a sense of thrownness in which is inherent. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like, this is an existential problem, right? Like, how much of this do we actually create? And this is, we have to accept that we are co-authors of our lives. Obviously, there is unfreedom in this system as well, but it's the best we have. And what we should try to do is eliminate the non-democratic influences upon social institutions to allow us to be free moral agents. Essentially, that's the goal of Marx, to eliminate those hegemonic influences that prevent ethical functioning. Well, they can learn virtue. If they do learn virtue in prison and they do see themselves as different people and they do have this metaphysical transformation, then they can be forgiven. I even said that. They could be offered clemency, but it's not obligated. In this case, it maybe is a waste of time. It would have been better off not giving it to them at all. Keeping it, this doesn't seem analogous to serving time, but I don't get the distinction. I have no idea what you're talking about there, mate. I'm sorry. So I recently read Plato's Gorgias, and I was wondering if Socrates' argument concerning the virtue of punishment still holds weight in today's society. Well, I'm kind of still using it. This idea that an individual would desire that punishment. I would say that an individual desires justice. That if a good individual or an ethical individual desires justice. If they don't desire justice, then they are not an ethical individual. If they understand the crime that they've committed and understand the debt and the discord that they have for another individual and see it as something like murder, then they should desire essentially their incarceration or their death. People are probably going to probably hate us for that. But I mean, like, I'm not going to lie, like, let's just assume, let's say Ted Bundy genuinely had a moment of genuine clarity. Let's say, because I know he was a Christian, right? Before and after that he did all the horrible, disgusting things he did. He understood, from what I'm aware, he came to this conclusion that he actually deserved death. And if that's so, that would have been the metaphysical transformation necessary for forgiveness. But whether he did or did not is unfalsifiable. I mean, we're talking about the mental states of individuals. We're going to have to take a gamble, right? It's a risk. Forgiveness is in like I would take forgiveness to be like the annihilation of that debt towards society. That crime has been wiped clean. Like, yes, you no longer owe anything. It is undone. So yeah. So if there's unfreedom is best we have, shouldn't we democratically choose how we should reform prisoners? It seems a defense of society's morals to refute your dislike of rehabilitation. It's not dislike of rehabilitation. It's the fact that rehabilitation is the use of individuals in order to perpetuate a liberal notion of their fondness. I mean, of their state of being. It's like, I will remake you in my image, rather than necessarily allow you to come to the conclusions that you actually deserve punishment and then allow you to have forgiveness. It's a means of perversely incentivizing criminals to behave themselves in society for the class interests of the few. It's a way of manipulating, psychologically modifying individuals to become different individuals with through social conditioning. It's not the propagation of rational moral agency towards the ethical realization that they are criminals, that they deserve punishment, and they now see the value in the other individual. And that's what I would say true rehabilitation would mean. And at that point, then you could say you could offer them clemency. Like, I would have no problem with that. But that's nowhere near what we would consider like rehabilitation in society today. How do we determine the appropriate amount of facilities and comfort? I think that's very difficult. I think that in overall, like, I don't believe in necessarily physically torturing an individual. So I think providing them with a fairly, I think taking that freedom from them is enough. If you just provide them essentially a complex from which they can't leave, but they've got all the amenities of life provided to a basic minimum standard. seems like an earthly version of hell. Well, you shouldn't commit crimes, really. I mean, if you've got a problem with going to prison for murder, then I would suggest you don't murder anyone. What do you want us to say? I give them the option. They can kill themselves if they'd rather do that. I don't see the issue. I'm 100% convinced that all moral philosopher are pure sadists. No, man, I can actually defend my position. If he can't defend his position, that's sad. And I think that, to be entirely honest with you, I think that is just liberal squeamishness more than anything. Like, the reason that people don't like death sentences isn't because they necessarily care about the people. They're like, oh no, we care about these serial killers who've murdered tens of thousands of people in that combined lives. It's more of like, oh right, well then they can go out and live society and then produce profit for organizations and ultimately lead to more virtuous lives or more valuable lives for me as an individual who wasn't the victim. I'll ask yourself the question: do you think that this would be? Do you think that the person who kills your mother, father, or loved ones is deserving of living a long, happy life, or do you think that they have done something which is irreparably damaging to your loved ones and deserve punishment? And if you genuinely look, and maybe we'll have such a difference that you genuinely go, you know what? If someone killed my mom or dad or brother or sister or partner horrifically, just absolutely discarded them, and laughed about it, still laughs about it, should they go out and live happy lives? Let's say they definitely will not commit crimes again. Let's say for all all purposes that this individual is incapable now of committing the kinds of atrocities that would be otherwise. Let's say they've become permanently disabled because of drug use or something, which has led to the loss of their limbs, right? So they're basically paraplegics and they've got no arms, right? Does that individual have the right to happiness and well-being whilst laughing about your loved one's suffering? If you can genuinely tell me that you think that person has a right to value that you think that your family did not, and that their judgment can be allowed to become concrete within our society, then I don't know what to say other than I think that you're absolutely disturbed. I think that's absolutely insane. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's a fair argument. If you want to make that argument, I'll happily argue against you, but I just think that doesn't understand ethics at all. It's not about being emotionally comprised in that, Noob Slayer. It's more about understanding what's at stake. I think that most people have this detached. This is the thing with liberal reasoning, right? It's the veil of ignorance. It's totally detached. People like to think of the imaginary scenario where they are absolutely indifferent to everything. Well, the only thing that's absolutely indifferent is the criminal justice system, and it evaluates contexts. It doesn't divorce itself from them. What I'm showing is the value at stake. The criminal justice system sees itself from the side of the victim. It's like, well, wait a minute, what am I owed? What has been taken from me and what needs to be restored? That's what the criminal justice system ought to be. In terms of the veil of ignorance, it's just a way of essentially abstracting so that you can, do a utilitarian calculation for maximum reasoning. And the only reason you're doing it is to try and prove liberal conclusions in the first place. So that's the problem. That's why I really hate it. There's no real justification for it. And the reason he didn't want to go down this route is because I'd rip it apart. If he wanted to talk metaethics, I'd rip him apart. But he won't talk metaethics. He won't talk theories of justice. He'll just talk about, values from which he presupposes. So, I was asking how serving time counts as payback for the infinite death. The murderer's lack of freedoms only matters to the murderer, not to the debtee who is dead. Well, the debtee and the state are one. I would say that the individual and the state are always one. That the identity of the individual is concrete within the state. Is formal within the state and concrete within them. So they are an expression of the collective identity of us all. That's what being an individual is. You're an individual member of our society. And so, like, when we talk about the debt to the individual, that just becomes the debt to the state, because the individual is the state. It's the objectification of the individual. Well, no, I mean, like, you would just say, like, punish Wall Street. Like, just because they can commit crimes, why should we let serial killers out? That's just really weird. Like, why would you say that? Like, oh, we shouldn't punish criminals who commit violent acts because people on Wall Street get away with non-violent acts. I mean, like, look, I think it's disgusting as well. Yeah, punish them. What do you, like, I don't know why you would go like, oh, well, people on Wall Street commit crimes and they don't get punished. Yeah, it's wrong. And I don't think that the criminal justice system should be bought off either. Like, you shouldn't be able to buy a fancy lawyer and get off with a crime. That's disgusting. Got it. BP wants to turn all murderers into quadriplegics. That's probably the takeaway, isn't it? Nah. Look, I think that there is also this idea that, like, look, the only reason we can't, pay for social programs is because of life without parole. I think that's absurd. I think in terms of, let's say, the budgets for the United States, even if we take $1 million per criminal, and let's say, I think there was like 7,000 people serving life without parole, and let's say 3,500, more than that, were wrongly convicted in the United States. So we're looking at about, what's that? Is that 3.5 billion, is that? It's like 1 million times 3.5 thousand. It's like 3.5 billion, isn't it? Let's have a check. No luck would help. I think I did that wrong. Whoops. Yeah, 3.5 billion. Right. So let's take 3.5 billion, right? The last infrastructure bill that was passed, like, that would be needed to cover these sorts of issues, was what, 1.5 trillion? 3.5 billion. I think the United States invested how many billion into weapons? So we can pay for defense, but we can't pay for justice. Okay. Well, I just think that's absolutely absurd. You can get the money, and never mind, like, even if it meant increased tax. This is a necessary requirement for society to function. It should be functioning unimpeded. So, but those weapons are really, really necessary. Exactly, right? Like, we can, this is, I actually genuinely hate that this idea that, like, if, it's the disgusting, like, if I'm supposed to be totally abstract with being a philosopher, but he thinks that if we stopped funding life without parole, that we're then going to put it into into the prevention of these criminals, is absolutely insane. Has he not seen who runs his state? You will get $3.5 billion worth of more weapons. That is all you're getting. Like, let's be entirely honest with ourselves. Like, the United States isn't going to be like, you know what? We're going to take all of the money out of life without parole and put that into, education systems and social care. Of course not. Like, it just seems like I get accused of being abstract when his economics is so abstract as well. You don't think that's what Foucault had in mind when he said society must be defended? I mean, me and Foucault have very staunch metaphysical differences, but I genuinely would be surprised that if Foucault is not necessarily... so, for example, when he talks about the... That's actually... Right. So, like, when he talks about in Discipline and Punish, like, the body of the condemned being, like, tied up on the scaffold and tortured and all that, used as a spectacle to demonstrate the power of the sovereign, and how its rejection was emphasized the a cry from the heart. I think he described it as. But then also was hijacked by power structures, which then brought around the disciplinary prison system. He points out in between those sections, the reformers who wanted to instead have a criminal justice system which was fair and punished the desires of the criminals as an act of deterrence, in the sense that the idea of the crime should irritate the ego of the individual who's committing it. So, like, if you commit, let's say, an act of vanity, you will face shame as punishment. And these are the things that the reformers were talking about. Like, you will face the negative valuation of you'll face your crime essentially turned back around onto you. And the thing is, with murder, they recommended letting people face the full harms of nature, death. So I do think Foucault would probably agree with me on that. But, you know. You said remaking in our image is ethically bad, but it removes agency. But we've admitted to this happens to everyone. But it happens in a way that we wish to avoid. Like, that's the idea of institutional change, that we're trying to actively overcome these issues, which are impeding the subjectivity of the individual. Which is why we are essentially trying to overcome the master-slave dialectic in Hegel. And it's why Marx would see it as an issue in terms of how these institutions are structured and how these traditions and power structures are necessarily hegemonically controlling us. Because he wants to eliminate what are the discrepancies between, in his case, it's material discrepancies. In Hegel, it's ideological discrepancies between individuals. So, like, yeah, like, that's what we need to overcome. But to then say that... this justifies rehabilitation, it doesn't. It justifies punishment. Yeah, you can come on and chat sometime. So can Noob Slayer if they want. I don't mind. What do you think of torturers whose victims survive? Or what about attempted murders? Okay, I mean, that's actually a good question. Like, should attempted murder be treated differently? I think that it should, in the sense that their actions have been made concrete, that judgments have been made concrete in their actions. I would say that attempted murder should be separated there. I think that it should face... I think that individuals, if the individual was successful, then that judgment would be made concrete in their actions, you see, and then that needs essentially that's what allows for the precipitation of debt and the actual criminal act to be punished. I mean, you can't punish people for things they haven't done, and that's why I hate this sort of liberal idea that, like, oh, well, we'll actually keep people in prison for public safety. No, you keep people in prison for the crime they've committed, and if you keep them in prison after that crime has been paid, after that debt has been paid, then you are now committing a crime. You're impeding their freedom. That is wrong. Like, even if you think they are going to go and commit another crime, they have atoned for their crime. You are wrong for imprisoning them. What do I think about torture victims who survive? I think restitution. Obviously, the state should try and give them some value back. Obviously, it's almost impossible to quantify this, but you can essentially give them alike values, essentially give them money to express their freedom in ways that allow them to live, good, happy lives, considering the harms that have befallen them. Give them more power in society, essentially. Obviously take that in first case, from the perpetrator as much as possible, and then also take from them what is really identical in terms of value, which is their subjectivity. I wouldn't say torture them, because I don't think that we need to lower ourselves to barbarism, but we can take like value from them, imprisonment, in this case, take that freedom. I was asking how serving time counts as infinite payback of the debt. The murderer's lack of freedoms only matters to the murderer, not to the debtee who is dead. I think I've already answered that, haven't I? Why only life without parole for murder? Because it's the only time that it actually has an infinite, like, as in if it infinite. I mean, like, anything that would cause, let's say, intentionally cause the death of someone, but I would call that murder anyway. But like, because it has an, like, you know, an act of fraud which steals 40 billion, which is horrific and harmful to society. You know, it's a punishable crime that should definitely be met with. Thank you for the follow. That should definitely be met with you know, with an act of restitution, make them pay back the money, you know, that kind of thing. You know, take from them that liberty and that freedom for a period of time, but they, you know, or you know, force them into social rehabilitation, like, not rehabilitation. What's the word I'm looking for? Social restitution programs. So like, you know, they could be doing public service and things like that, and essentially engaged in serving the public good, since they've stole from the public. Should the justice system be virtuous? Understand separating obligation and virtue of the individual? Yeah. I mean, I think that's a good thing. I think that it's ultimately, I would want a society that is willing to forgive people who have genuinely changed, and I would look to forgive. It's like in Shakespeare, right? You know, the quality of mercy is not strained; it droppeth like the gentle rain from heaven to the place beneath. You know, it twice blesses those who giveth and those who take. It's, and you know, at the end, it's like the idea of, it's the mitigation of justice to something greater than justice, and that's where I would stand. I think that it essentially, mercy is something beautiful, and those who are deserving of mercy, you know, those people who have genuinely repented for their crimes, accepted that punishment, and treat people as equals, I would want to give those people mercy, and I think that it would be a virtue of the state if we did. Why is the individual the state? Because the state essentially is built off a relationship of mutual recognition, notions of everything from contractual relationships to private property to everything in terms of how our social institutions function requires the evaluation of agents, as having value in and of themselves in terms of their judgments. So yeah, I mean, if you want to learn more about that, I would recommend reading Hegel. Specifically, you could read Rose's Reader's Guide to Hegel, and that'll probably help you. Sorry, quick off-topic question, but why is the best way to reach out to you? What is the best way to reach out to you directly? I run a video project which will be shown in Davos during the World Economic Forum, and would love your participation. Sorry for the repost. Yeah, that's absolutely fine. You can reach me through email. That's actually me about. It's perspectivephilosophy2@gmail.com. You can also reach out to me on Discord. I often take messages there. So yeah, whatever's best for you. Thanks for the invite. In Canada, less than 5% of reported white-collar crimes are investigated by the police. That's absolutely disgusting. I'm with you, Scorpative. I'm assuming you think that's wrong, and I also think that's wrong. That shouldn't happen. Of course, white-collar crime should be punished. And I think that it is the discrepancies in this state that allow for that. I think that the criminal justice system's been bought over, and it perpetuates an egoistical interests of the wealthy. I think that Hobbes got our society more closely than Locke. I think he understood the way in which individuals were behaving and propagating their interests in society far better than Locke did. I think Locke, was unfortunately a little bit naive in that, and I think that's sad. Subjecting others to moral philosophy is itself an act of sadism. Maybe you're right. I can't even argue against that. Yeah, I mean, if you wanted to define it like that, yeah, just to confirm that you don't think rehab is bad. I think the current liberal rehab is bad. Yeah. Um, the non-coercive rehabilitation is like in our society, it doesn't happen, and is ultimately creating a perverse interest for individuals to essentially see a means of escaping that punishment. If that was overcome and an individual's just given ethical education, I even said in the debate, yeah, if you want to just ethically educate people, and then if they truly are repentant for their crimes, then offer them forgiveness. I'd just see that as inherently different to the way our society functions. He didn't. He said that he thought that was parole, which I find hilarious. But yeah. Do you think that some people deserve hell? I would probably take the Aquinian view of hell. I'd say that hell is the frustration of the wicked will. What hell actually is the absence of goodness, the absence of God. So if the individual who ends up in hell is actually torturing themselves, it's not that they're actually in a place that is burning, they're being burnt alive and it's, no, it's more of the fact that it's allegorical. It's the understanding that an individual is making themselves miserable beyond all compare. The more vicious and wicked they are, the more they suffer because of that desire to express their egoistical self-conceit is boundless, and so allows for infinite suffering in that. It forever perpetuates in a state of felicity. So yeah, they don't stop desiring power, and power onto power that doesn't even cease in death. I would say that's probably hell. I don't want to talk about meta-ethics. Is something I've been hearing more and more from utilitarians. Yeah, because it does shit at it. No utilitarian ever defends the meta-ethics. Like, look at it like this. Jeremy Bentham was an egoist. He was a Hobbesian egoist who didn't understand Hobbes. John Stuart Mill was, again, more of an egoist, but he didn't really understand how to kind of resolve these values. He tried a bit better. And I'm yet to see anyone really offer a more convincing case for utilitarianism. It's always some sort of egoism that perpetuates itself. And I think egoism is a vile, unjust philosophy. So, yeah, it just seems that like it's the propagation of their conception of good. Whatever I think is good, we're going to maximize that. What are my interests? It's like Vorsch, man. It's like every time he he talks about like utilitarianism and the maximization of good, or not changing the status quo, and it's like, right, you're doing exactly what all utilitarians do and just talk about it in abstract terms to the point in which it's absolutely meaningless. But I mean, his is a little bit worse because I think he actually genuinely understands he's doing that and doesn't even seek for the expression of everyone's interests, which he's misguided about, but instead just seeks the interests of himself. I think most utilitarians just have a misguided notion of good rather than, like, let's say, a self-conceited notion of good. I don't think they're mostly evil. I think they're mostly wrong, ignorant. How would you punish people that have committed 2 murders if they've committed 2 times an infinite crime? What's 2 times infinity? Noobs there. It's infinity. It's the same punishment. Like, you can't multiply infinity. It's like talking about an infinite set. If it's a set of sets, right? You know what I mean? Like, especially if the set contains itself, like actually that's a debate in mathematics, but like unless we're willing to get into the philosophy of maths and you're saying that actually it's infinite times 2, I would just say that it's the same punishment. Yeah, I see a utilitarian saying, let's not talk about ethics, let's talk about whatever's most effective a lot, and like effective to what end. Exactly. They just presuppose their ends. All of them. They're just like, oh, right, well, what's good is what I want to be good. And it's like, right, so we just presuppose your notion of goodness. And in this case, it doesn't consider the victim. Your notion of goodness only consider those who are alive now. The victim are not to be considered. Their notion of goodness is not considered in this. I see that's absolutely perverse. The idea that we just reject the value of the victim, just absolutely, to maximize some sort of utilitarian goal, as if, oh, they're dead now, but everyone else can live happy lives, right? And that's what we do. It's like, that's just sick. Like, that's absolutely sick. Would you punish Hitler the same as someone who kills one person? Yeah. That's what we've just, yeah, absolutely. There's nothing else you can do. Like, unless you think that there's something, more than you can take than an individual's life. Like, you're going to start killing their family or something. Like, I don't know what you... Absolutely disgusting. Like, of course you can only kill someone once. Like, you can just resuscitate them, kill them again. No, I agree. Like, I don't think that just because you'd want your mum's murderer punished, you should expect the justice system to. I think that I would make a rational argument for that. And I agree. It would be the same as someone with Stockholm syndrome. Well, I wouldn't let them be the judge. Ooh, is that a burger? Ooh, that looks nice. Yes, I'll come off in a second. I'm going to have to go in a second, guys. Would I create a hell simulator for people that cause hell to others? I don't... You can't create like a hell simulator for... What the fuck, man? Like, I think that like we can just imprison people. I'm not pro-torture. I don't think that's... I don't think that's justified. I don't think we should lower ourselves to that level even. I think it's... like, we can take people's value from them, their freedom from them, without subjecting them to negative valuation. Like, there's no need to propagate harm, as in badness, onto others. We simply reject any notion of their goodness, as in they are not allowed to be moral agents who try to achieve the good in our society. They are exiled from it. Obviously, you can't just cast them into the jungle, for one, because you just, like, they'll go and kill someone else anyway. Like, society doesn't work like that. But two, I think they need to be held accountable to some degree. And I think that the way that they are held accountable should be the loss of their life. If they don't want to die, then life imprisonment. If they want to die, then let them die. Hot take, torture is a greater crime than murder? Nah, man. I mean, torture and murder in that, yeah. In the sense that you've not only taken someone's life, but then you've inflicted great harm upon them beforehand. Maybe. Either way, I think it's probably the same ethic that's running through the torturer and the torturous murderers in the murderer. The absolute rejection of the individual's evaluation and the promotion of their own. So yeah. Wall Street stuff is ultra-violent as in funding genocides. Well, look, I'm not even disagreeing. I think, like, if someone's funding genocides, I would consider that the same as like, if someone is actively, deliberately funding a genocide, like hiring a hitman, I think they should get murder. Yeah. I don't think non-vegans should be put in jail because they don't know what they're doing. If an individual was totally indoctrinated into a murder cult, let's say they were raised as children and totally, like, psychologically manipulated, I would count that as diminished responsibility or guilt. Yeah, I would definitely do that. But like, this is the point I was trying to make. Like, when we talk about manslaughter and murder, there is a difference in the UK in how we evaluate the responsibility of that individual. How responsible are they for their actions? If the individual is not responsible for their actions, then we wouldn't consider it murder. So yeah. You keep people in prison in order to make money for the state. No, I don't think it makes. I mean, it costs money for the state, right? Like, or do you mean like I mean, like, look, I mean, I think the weird thing is that I think that the state looks at people as a means to an end more than anything else, and the perpetuation of a justice system is necessary. What kind of justice system is that? The one that we have, I think, it facilitates what is a liberal capitalist agenda. I don't think that it facilitates necessarily a indifferent justice notion of justice. So yeah, I think that there is an argument to say that you know, and you know, there is also things that are like to essentially kind of show what Foucault was kind of getting at, is that the proliferation of delinquency has societal ramifications that benefit certain classes of individuals, like division, for example, or you know, like a drug dealer class to facilitate the desires of the coke addicts in Wall Street and stuff like that. Like, so, like, you know, like the production of delinquents in our criminal justice system is real, and I think that's usually for pettier crimes. It's usually like we imprison people who've committed petty theft, put them in a community of criminals who then they learn from, become indoctrinated by, you know, become essentially compromised into a state of being, and then be released for quote unquote good behavior, as in like not breaking rules, whilst having a more perverse mindset than when they went in. Like, you know, some kid who steals, like there was a kid who stole beer from like their neighbor's yard or something, and they got like 20 years in prison because of past offenses of like shoplifting and stuff. It was like ridiculous. That's absolutely vile. Like, I think non-violent crimes do not deserve prison. Someone indoctrinated to a murder cult. You're talking about our troops. Well, I mean, kind of. I mean, like, look, I mean, like, to be entirely honest with you, would you consider a soldier like that, say, that goes and fights a war and it's an unjust war, a criminal? I wouldn't consider them a criminal. I'd consider the criminal to be those politicians that have sent them to the unjust war. If I make someone blind, deaf, and dumb and take away their hands and feet, what ought my punishment be? Like, I think if you've made someone's life suffering to the point in which non-existence is preferable, then it equates death. Like, if you've made it so that we would be better off killing that individual because you've given them locked-in syndrome, and it can be considered a mercy killing, an act of euthanasia to let that person die, then I would say that you've willed their death. You've created that life. You've made them live a life that's unlivable. I'm coming. Okay, guys. I'll answer 3 more questions and then I'll bounce. Random with thoughts on cultural relativism. I think that cultures, the relativism that exists between cultures is epistemic and not ontological. Ultimately, right and justice are absolute, and right and justice can be discovered by any state. At what level of that discovery and how much we gain ethical knowledge is relative between states. So what an individual's ethical truth is for one state versus ethical truth for another state can vary, the same way as like notions of physics and geography and whatever can vary from state to state, historical time period, and so on. But in terms of absolute, like, socio-cultural relativism, as in maybe some form of ethical phenomenalism, ontologically, I see is flawed. Should non-vegans get life without parole? Of course not. They don't even know what they're doing. Like, it's not a crime. It's not a crime within our society. Like, if people were committing, like, if people knew that killing animals was wrong, it was protected by the law, and then they killed those animals, I would expect legal consequences to those people who commit that crime. And I would expect that to be the same as humans. But the same as it is for humans. I mean, we're hypothesizing what, like a futuristic state, like a couple of hundred years in the future or something. What if we gave them the choice to live in prison or brainwash? You mean like kind of like Shutter Island, when he's going to go and get that like lobotomy? I mean, I'm not sure. That would be my honest answer. It's a question on personal identity and whether they'd be the same person. I don't know. That would probably be the only truthful answer I could give there. Yeah, I know I shouldn't use Vorsh as an example for utilitarians, but I'm saying he's a popular one and everyone relates to utilitarianism for that. I mean, who would you rather use? I could use like Peter Singer. Are you going to be happy with his conclusions? I like the guy in the sense that I think he wants to do good things, but I don't think that his conclusions necessarily are bang on. I think that his notions of justice are wrong, and I think he's probably one of the most reasonable utilitarians out there. Does the motive for murder matter? Well, I mean, the motive matters in the sense that the intent matters to whether it was murder. So, like, if you intended to, like, let's say you intended, like, you got in a car and you're driving drunk, that's involuntary manslaughter or vehicular manslaughter in the UK. You've run someone over, that's vehicular manslaughter. And in that respect, your intention matters. If your intention is, whether it's sadism, whether it's theft or whatever you kill someone for, it doesn't matter. You've always put your moral good over their moral good, so you've always treated them as a means to an end. Well, if they've genuinely changed, Jonathan, if you think life without parole is wrong, because what if they've genuinely changed? I think if they've genuinely changed, then they would realize that they are deserving of the punishment, as in they would recognize that the crime that they've committed, they would take responsibility for that and seek to repay the debt. If they realize it's infinite, then they would accept that punishment. At that point, I think they could be offered forgiveness if we so chose. I think that would be a really lovely thing to do. But then that's not parole, that's clemency. There is a separation between a pardon and clemency and parole. One is saying your crime no longer exists. You've been cleared of your crime. And the other is saying that that you've been pardoned of your crime. And the other is saying, like, essentially, you've been a good boy, you're doing what you're told, and so we'll let you get back into society now because you're not going to harm any of us who are still alive. It's not the consideration of the victim in the same way that clemency can give. Clemency can be an expression of the goodness of the victim, that this person would want it. Like, you could even say, like, an individual could tick a box. Like, if someone is genuinely deserving of forgiveness and we come to that conclusion, I would want to forgive them. And that way it even emboldens the beauty of that individual who's being killed. But no. I don't think that excuse me, that parole fulfills that mandate. Okay. Let's see if there's any. What about the absence of free will and the fact that they might have? I was waiting for someone to bring up free will. I mean, it depends on what you mean by the absence of free will. If you mean that an individual has diminished responsibility, I would say that is no longer murder. If you were to say that that none of us have free will, then I would say then this debate is absolutely pointless because the conditions are either predetermined or determined by, something other than reason. It even calls into question the value of reason itself and the ability of truth to be discovered. Like whether truth is actually being sought or whether it's actually the production of a currency system which evolutionarily obtains some sort of endorsement by a preconditioned brain. So like this is why determinism sucks. in so many ways. I mean, that, and as well, like, it also doesn't understand the metaphysics of what humans are and how we engage with the world. It presupposes, let's say, empiricism or worse again, physicalism, and notions of causation, which are transcendently applied by a mind in the first place, and undermines science itself, usually, for the propagation, no less than a scientific conclusion, typically. But why is cultural relativism ontologically flawed? Because, I would say that cultural relativism is ontologically flawed because it normally relies upon people's judgments of good actually not obtaining an object. It either is special pleading in terms of epistemology, or it argues that all our words and concepts don't obtain objects. For example, see Hume in the rejection of ethics in terms of anti-realism. And I would say that there's a few issues with that. These were arguments for cultural relativism then no longer obtain reality, and so we can't actually see whether it applies or not. So the skepticism destroys itself. And then two, I would say that in terms of the way that language functions, it presupposes the existence of an object, and that would be Robert Brandam's retort to, let's say, a Wittgensteinian phenomenalism. So yeah. Okay, right. Thank you guys. It's been nice chatting. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation. If you liked it, then consider subscribing. So, take it easy, peeps. It is a vegan burger, okay? Don't worry. Take it easy, peeps. And as always,